I wanted to give you some help with the assignment in Chapter 7 where we're using an array. Now an array is basically a collection or a list, and it gives you a way with one line of code to declare multiple variables as long as they're the same data type, like all strings or all doubles or all ints. And it gives us a way to use the same name with a numeric address called an index, so we can reference individual values in the collection, but it's very powerful. So if I need to have three names, instead of having to do string name 1, string name 2, string name 3, I can actually do just one variable declaration, then I can reference them as names 0, names 1, names 2, and we're going to look at that really quickly. Now there's like 3 or 4 different ways to actually do this program. One way is that you could follow the pattern in Chapter 3 and break this out into its own class file. And maybe if I get time, I'll go back and show you how to do that. But it's just as acceptable, since this is basically to practice with arrays, for us to do this in main without going to all the overhead, because we're just getting practice with arrays here. So notice I'm going to set up one array. I don't need any extra imports or anything, and I'm going to set up an array. I'm going to call it names. So in the past, what you would have had to have done to do this is you would have to done string names 0, for example, equals Tarzan, and then you would have done string names 1 equals, and I'm going to put the word loves in here, and that's not a name. I'm going to put spaces before and after it, so that when I print out Tarzan loves Jane, I don't run the words together, I get Tarzan. Then when it prints out loves, it does space, love, space, and then I get Jane, so that it's readable. And then you would have had to have actually done a third string with Jane's name in there. And then you would have had to have done a print line to string them all together. You couldn't have used a loop. There's no way I know of that you could have used a loop, so you would have had to done this type of a thing, okay, to get what you want. And then to reverse it, Tarzan loves Jane, and we want to write Jane loves Tarzan, we'd have to come in here and we'd have to change this to a 2 and this to a 1. So that is the way we would have had to do it before we found out about arrays. So now I can just basically declare one collection, one unit to hold all of this, and I'm still making it a string, and I'm just going to call it names without any numbers after it. But notice, instead of string names equals new string, which I could also do when I wanted to do this stuff here, I could have done string names 1 equals new string, and then I could have done names 1 equals love. Here, to declare an array, you're always going to do the data type, in this case string, but it could be a double or an int. You're going to put, for a one-dimensional array, which is all we're dealing with right now, it's like a row in a spreadsheet, we are going to put a set of empty angle brackets. That clues Java in that this is a collection, but they're empty. We don't put any numbers in here. Then we put what we want to call it. I want to call it names. You could call it XYZ, whatever you want to call it. Then we put equals new. We put the data type again, which is string. And in this set of angle brackets, we put the total number of items that will be in this collection. So with an array, we sort of have to know exactly how many items we have from the very beginning. It is not flexible. If I didn't know how many names I was going to have, I might default it to say 50. And then if I only use 3, I'm inefficient. I've eaten up all the extra memory for 50, and I can't do anything about that. I can't change that later, okay? So it's important to know how many. Sometimes you err on the side of caution, you declare too many and you're inefficient, but that's just how an array works. You cannot change the size of it later. You may not fill in the other 40 odd values, but the space and the allocation in memory has already been eaten up if you declare 50 here and you only use 3. So I'm just warning you of that. Very inflexible as far as reducing it, or you cannot add to it. If I decide that I need a fourth name here for some reason, when I run this, I'm going to get a compile error. It's going to tell me you have 4 names, but you told me that there were only 3. So it's not flexible, okay? But it's still very useful. So I'm going to set it up here and declare it, and then to populate the names, I simply put names and then angle bracket, and I put this numeric index, which is really like the address, like, you know, your post office box address, right? I have to give it an address so it knows whether I mean the first one, the second one, or the third one. Which one do I want to fill in? So I tell it 0. We always start counting with 0 with an array. That's always tricky. We put the first element, we give it the index of 0, so the first one has Tarzan in it. The second one, and this is what trips student up, it's not names 2, it's names 1, because we have a 0 offset because we started counting with 0. So the second element with an index or address of 1 has the word loves in it. And then the last one, which has an index or address of 2, even though it's the third element, has Jane. So you can always count on the fact that whatever number is here, subtract 1 from it, and that will be the address of the last item, because you're always starting with 0. So if I have 3 as my count, my total number of names, their addresses are going to be 0, 1, 2. The last address is 3 minus 1 or 2. If I had 900 names, the last one would be in location 899. 900 minus 1. You can always count on that. Now there's another way if I wanted to, instead of populating the array separately from the declaration, I can declare and initialize it in one line if I choose to. And notice the difference. String, angle bracket with no number, the word names equals, and then curly braces surrounding the values. Java will count them and figure out that it has 3 in it. And it will assign this one to names 0, this one to names 1, and this one to names 2. So it's 2 different ways to declare and initialize the values in your variable. It's personal preference which one you like. So now if I want to print out Tarzan loves Jane, I can use a for loop instead of hard coding in my print line. I can use a for loop. Notice I have to make sure that my counter starts with 0, otherwise I'll skip Tarzan. I'll just get loves Jane because the address of the first one is 0. I'm going to add 1 each time, so I'm going to go 0, 1, 2 in my index or addresses. And then notice here, I have chosen to use one of the properties of an array. There's a characteristic of an array called length, and I can use the array name with no brackets, just names.length, and it will give me a 3 here. It will give me the total count, the total number of items in the array. Or I could hard code a 3. I could put I less than 3. Notice it's less than because the numbers go 0, 1, 2. If I do less than equals, I'll get an error when I run it, array index out of bounds. It'll try to find names bracket 3 bracket, which would be the 4th name, and we don't have 4, we have 3. So when we use a for loop with an array, my suggestion is you always do counter less than array name dot length, and you'll always be good. So then I'm going to print them out. Here I'm just putting a blank line to make it more readable, because notice I used a print to keep them all on the same line and not a print line. Here I'm going to force the carriage return to the next line, so Jane loves Tarzan gets its own line. And here I'm just reversing the for loop. I'm starting at the end. I'm taking the count, which is going to be 3, but I have to subtract 1 to make sure I reference name sub 2. If I do just without the minus 1 here, I'll get an array index out of bounds, because it'll try to find names bracket 3 bracket, which does not exist because of the 0 offset. Remember, names sub 3 does not exist. It's only 0, 1, and 2. So since this is always going to be the total count, which is 3, I have to subtract 1 so that I starts with 2. I'm going to loop as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, so I get Jane loves Tarzan. If I just do greater than 0, I'll only get Jane loves, and I won't pick up Tarzan. And then I go down, so I go 2, 1, 0 in reverse order, and I print out Jane loves Tarzan. And here I just put a blank line to make sure that my output was readable, so I didn't get build successful jammed right after Jane loves Tarzan. Now that's using an array. The other thing you can do is you can import the array list class, which is much more flexible because it allows you to dynamically resize the array. You don't even have to know how many items are in the array when you declare it, unlike, or in an array list, sorry. So array is, hush, an array is a fixed length item. It's not flexible. We can't change the size dynamically, but array list we can. We don't have to know up front how many we have. We can just declare it and then dynamically add to it or shrink it, reduce it to free up memory, so it's much more flexible and efficient. The trick with array list, it will not work with doubles and ints. It will work with strings. It will work with the wrapper class double capital D and integer capital I. We'll talk about that later. But for this one we can use it because we're using strings. So here's the tricky thing about declaring an array list. Look at the format. It's a little weird. Array list, angle bracket, data type, string, and here's what I'm calling it, names2. I can't use names because I have an array with that, and that would give me an error. So names2 equals new array list. Again, string in the angle brackets, and notice this weirdness with paren. Everybody forgets that, and you'll get an error. Okay, so array list, data type, and angle brackets. Whatever you want to call it equals new. Array list again, data type and angle brackets, paren. You just have to commit that to memory. And notice here I can add names2.add Tarzan. He goes into the 0 position. We still have that whole 0 offset issue even with array lists. Names.toAdd. I put loves in there. Names.toAdd Jane. So now I've got the same deal. Tarzan loves Jane in my 0, 1, and 2 addresses. Okay? But it's just so much easier. And I didn't even have to know how many names I had. And if I wanted to, now I could do names.3 and put a bunch of exclamation points and so on. Okay? Much more flexible. Oh, sorry, names2.add. Now this is in my 0 location, my 1, my 2. Now I do have a names2 with an address of 3 because I have 4 elements. And so I'm going to use the same for loop, but notice one critical difference. With an array list, we have a method called .size paren that gives us the count. So this tells me 4. There are 4 items in here. You're pretty much going to have to use this instead of hard coding a 4 here. Instead of saying I less than 4, since you don't know for sure how many items are ever in an array list because it's dynamic, you pretty much have to do array list names.size paren to get the count. So less than that, again it's less than. If I do less than equals, I'm going to get array index out of bounds. And then here I do the same thing as I did above. I have to take the size of 4, subtract 1, because my numbers for my addresses go 0, 1, 2, 3. So notice the difference between the loops. Here I can hard code. If I wanted to, I could type I less than 3, or I can use array name.length with no parentheses. Okay, same thing here. But I could also have hard coded a 3 here. I could have said 3 minus 1, or I could have just put I equals 2. With an array list, I can't really hard code anymore because I don't know their size, and it's .size paren. So a couple of tricky things. Hope that's helpful.